All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going through what's called Fortify 365. This is a entry level from the start to the end of at least our layer one of securing Microsoft 365 tenancies. I know a lot of people want to be able to do this kind of stuff themselves. So this is literally going to be an instructor led class. We're going to start off with the very basic fundamentals today. All right, so those who don't know me, my name is Eric Taylor. I am the founder and chief forensic operator here at Barricade Cyber Solutions. And literally what we do is we are on a mission to make businesses more safer tomorrow than they are today. That's kind of the point of this course. We do digital forensic sensor response. We have IR retainer. Like I said before, this is a bi-weekly live webinar series. Today we're covering lesson one, the general Microsoft 365 settings. We'll go through Azure Active Directory. We're going to go, we'll tie that into a makeshift domain controller that we'll have up in Azure. We'll go through the Defender. We'll go through Cloud Apps, securing your SharePoint, OneDrive, so forth and so on. We may have more than 12 episodes, but right now we want to at least schedule 12. There's a lot to cover. Some of these things will run only 30 minutes. Some of these things will run about an hour, just depending on what it is. But we're trying to make it that way. Every other week, you guys are getting a little bit more. You can go and take real world scenarios of what we're seeing and what we're doing and things of that nature and being able to implement it there. So again, you are being more secure tomorrow than you are today by tuning into this, right? Like I said, today is the 365 general settings. We are going through the basic fundamentals, and we are going to get started with the identity DNS. We'll talk about your branding. We'll talk about session timeouts, disabling legacy auth, things of that nature. The lay of the land. This is a brand new tenant. It is Fortify 365. We tanked out our old one because it is a throwaway tenant that we use for a lot of training. So we nuke and pave this tenant so many times. Microsoft sometimes flags us on this stuff. And we use Cloudflare for everything. So you'll see we have some DNS records that are in there. Not a big deal. Nothing, intellectually secret there by any means. So that's kind of the lay of land. 365 Cloudflare for our DNS records. And I say let's just get started, right? So those who don't know, if you are in 365 Admin Center, this looks very, very familiar to you. You have all your groupings there. You can go into your other administrative settings. In here, I'm going to drop a lot of this stuff into the chat so you have what we call quick links. So the way that we work, at least what works best for my workflow. All right, so the first one we're going to go to literally is you want to go in and make sure that your domain information is correct, right? So, you want to make sure that you put all of your proper contact information in there. So you want to make sure you have your technical contact information, all the basic stuff, but you won't believe how many times we've gone into a tenant and we have not seen some of this basic stuff put in, right? So definitely make sure that you are putting this information. This is the information Microsoft will use to contact you in case there is a potential problem with your tenant. And if we've had clients actually call us or prospects call us and say, hey, is there any way you can help us regain access to our 365 tenant? And we go through that whole process, and it literally would take anywhere between 3 to 5 days to do what we call a tenant takeover. And, sometimes a little faster, sometimes slower. We are adherent to Microsoft's timeline and their availability for the team. But it's because they had a problem, massive spam, massive account takeovers, whatever the case was. And because they didn't have this information in here, it was never, ever there. So Microsoft had no way to get in touch with the organization. Now, with that, we will jump, what we configure next is our release updates, my release preferences, I should say. So how often do you want to make sure that your tenant is being updated? Microsoft will release new items, new features, new everything. So do you want the standard release for everybody? Like, as you can see down here, target release for certain releases for certain users or select users. This one right here. This is for the larger organizations. And, if you have what you call, I've never been a big fan of this term, but if you have champions in your organization that are to be the test subject for new releases, go through things and say, we want to have this, that, or whatever to test out things first, then you can do that. That will be your what we call your beta testers inside of things. If you want to have targeted releases everywhere for everybody, then you can set the versions that you want, and that would be in a different spot. Because as you notice here, even though I've checked it, um, sorry for the improper box draw, but the there you will select your versions on that. But typically we just say standard release because you're not Microsoft is not going to push out your any sort of beta early access what they call insider or purview releases to everybody. This is just a standard update, kind of the things that you see that go out globally. So definitely make sure you consider that, how big is your organization, things of that nature, and what makes sense for your organization. Here's where you can start customizing your Microsoft 365 tenant. We'll pause here for one moment and do story time. So there are a lot of people who have been in the Microsoft tenant for a while. You know about man-in-the-middle attacks, aka the fake Microsoft phishing pages, right? So this will help to a degree verify that you are kind of going to a Microsoft page. Now I say that with a big freaking asterisk, right? So you a lot of the landing pages will pull that stuff in from Microsoft, all the customization and all your branding, things of that nature, and make it look like you are logging into legitimate. A lot of the tools that are out there, like Evil Gen X, and Gen X, and some other tools, they've all adopted this thing. But your low people or script keys, if you will, that don't put a lot of effort into stuff, it'll still work for that. However, I know a lot of organizations, they love to have their branding inside of everything that they do. Now, whether you actually go through that or not, this is what we are wanting to make sure that you always select. Prevent users from overriding their themes. I know people want to do their customizations, but let's just keep things, civil to some degree. Um, you can add your logos. So this will pull in from an external source. So make sure that you have, you can use even the logo off of your website, right? And, just paste that URL in there and you're good to go. If you're doing dark themed, white logo. So that way it goes there. You can even select, I would not, me personally, I would not do on click link, and I'll tell you why. So if you have your custom logo here or in here, if your user clicks on your logo, your company's logo, it's probably going to go to your website, right? Or whatever page that you want them to do. We've had a couple of clients that said, no, we actually want that, and we want it to go to our help desk portal. So like if users were not able to log into the help desk. I think they were using Zendesk at the time, but it was one thing for them to, go in and say, hey, you're in the 365 tenant, right? Yeah. Click on the company logo up there and it'll automatically take them into their ticketing system so that way they can create a ticket. So it was one way for a workflow process, but 9 times out of 10, the one-click link is it's really not needed, but that's some stuff for you to consider. This is where you're going to want to set up all of your help desk information. So you'll add your help desk contact information. And I know you had a customer information, but this is where you're going to set up all that stuff. So who is in your help desk? And we'll just say Fred Williams. Why not? 911. Not a valid phone number. Go figure. All right, we'll do 843-871-9111. How about that? And no reply. And the reason I'm doing this because it is required to be entered when we start setting up some other stuff in other videos. Help desk website. We'll just say Zendesk for this one, whatever. It's not what we use, but it wants me to do the 8, whatever. One big thing that I always try to make sure people do is next step in this thing is go in and make sure you disable Bing. In there, you'll want to make sure that Microsoft is not collecting support queries. They're not Bing is not gathering any of that intel. Make sure that is checked off. And look, one thing for people to really understand is, yes, we want Microsoft to be able to help us out when we have a problem, but in today's modern technology, with Copilot and everything else like that, and we'll talk about some of that stuff later on, but there's no reason to be just giving away information about our tenant to Microsoft. We're trying to build up at least a lot of the stuff that's being talked about today, you will able to map to CIS version 8, right? So this is part of a security framework. So you're mapping these things, you're creating a more secure tenant. We don't need any holes in our pool, if you will. We don't need little water springs, right? So let's just close out any intel that we're sending out that does not need to be sent out, right? So make sure you disable that. Next big thing that we always go through in some of the earlier stuff is enabling idle session timeout. All right. This one can get a little funky. And I want y'all to take close consideration to this. You want users to sign out when they're not active, right? There's a thing called session cookies. We just don't want that stuff out. Anything we can be able to force a user to sign out and have to re-authenticate after a certain amount of time is best practice. However, what is acceptable policy for your organization? Full disclosure, I'm not going to say what our acceptable policy is, but we do have this in place naturally. But your options are, of course, you can do custom in minutes. Typically anywhere between like an hour to 3 hours is typical best practice. So from what we see, again, we do have some clients that do 6. We never really recommend, 12 or 24. That's, to me personally, and I think anybody ever watching this will agree, 12 and 24 hours of an idle timeout is a bit excessive, right? So I typically recommend 3 hours. All right. So, if you're a Leo and you work in with law enforcement under CIIS or you're under FinCEN, maybe you have to do 30-minute, but most businesses, consider 1 to 3 hours. When you're making these changes, there is a term that we call a Microsoft minute. It's literally not a minute. Any changes that you make to your 365 tenant can take up to 24 hours to implement. if you're using OWA, you're using Exchange or not, you're using Excel, SharePoint, all the web applications. This is that idle session timeout. Oh yeah, it's even now that I actually look at this, it actually says that. So just to zoom in here, idle session timeout for users automatically out of the 365 web apps. Like I said, OWA, Exchange, I keep want to say Exchange, sorry. Uh, SharePoint, OneDrive, all those Outlook apps, Power BI, anything that's web facing will be under that purview. All right, now we want to, we're going through, the basic stuff here, and we're like, yep, we're feeling good. We're taking care of idle sessions. We are, we got our help desk information in here. We got our company information in here. We're starting to cook with some gas here, ladies and gentlemen. Well, now let's get on to modern authentication. And this is really about disabling basic authentication. Again, another caveat. I hate to do this, but the way Microsoft has built this freaking monstrosity, I feel like I have to, unfortunately, where we are seeing two sides where we have the administrative side and we'll have conditional access and other things that will further advance this thing later on. But until we get to conditional access, and we'll have to come back and make some other changes. Again, we'll talk about that in future episodes. We want to make sure that we're taking care of some of the basics right now, right? So if you're following along and you have conditional access turned on, this particular will not mess with that. When I last tested it 45 days ago on another tenant. As with everything with Microsoft, please test this first, okay? So what we're doing is disabling the modern auth. We don't want users to authenticate and download email from POP3 and SMTP or send out through SMTP. We don't want any of that stuff anymore, right? So this is what we need to do. So we are asking Microsoft to make sure we turn on modern authentication. Modern auth is for Windows 10 and later. But also around Outlook 2020 or 2013, which is pretty old. But we also want to make sure that we are disabling SMTP that is used by POP and IMAP. There's really no need unless you're using a printer, scan to email, whatever. There's a way to do connectors that's kind of out of the scope for this thing, for any of our series, but there are ways around it. But most businesses today do not need it because you can update the firmware on your printer for the most part, and it will have the software update where it will integrate with not only Microsoft, but Box and your free personal OneDrive and Google Docs. And there's so many things, right? So that's been something that's been asked for years and years, and most modern printers will have that current feature availability. And then definitely turn on modern auth, turn on advanced SMTP. As you can see, when I started this video, this is a brand new tenant. This is already on by default. You definitely want to check and make sure that it is still enabled, because as with any technology, things change, but definitely go there. Make sure it's checked on your new tenant and kind of go with that. All right. This may or may not apply to most people. All right. For larger organizations, it definitely does. And we're going to go and work on security groups. Now, there is a way to apply licenses to groups. All right. So let's say hypothetically in your company, We'll add a new group, and let's say, we'll say truck drivers. All right. And let's say, not, let's say dock worker. Well, no, that'll go, let's say HR. How about that? Okay, we'll make an HR and we'll make an IT. I'm not sure why I keep wanting to click on that. IT department. All right. So we made some mock groups, right? Now coming back over to here in our admin, we'll come into licenses. So let's just say hypothetically you have products out the wazoo in your tenant. Again, this is just a mock tenant, but let's just say hypothetically you have, this one's not running Teams because we don't need it. But let's say you have some team licenses. Let's say you're using Teams for telephony. So some users will have the um, the voice feature, and some users won't. Some users need some departments in your organization need Power BI. Whatever that use case is, when you come in and say, we'll do this thing, and then we'll say groups, and we'll just assign that license to the group name. In this particular one, we'll just say HR, right? So we're applying the Office 365 E5, no Teams to HR. When you come in here and you create a new user, all right. Now you could do this here, or if you're just staging users, you just say no license for now. And I know a lot of the organizations we support, they will have batches of, 5, 10, 15, 20 users, unfortunately. And, sometimes they wash in, sometimes they wash out, whatever. Now, when we come back down to groups, there we are. So active groups. Oh, for some reason, so in some of the older tenants, oh, we'll just do it here. That's right. Oh, so they slipped. Okay, sorry. Like I said, Microsoft's changing stuff. So today we're going to make Kim part of HR, and we'll say members. We'll add Kimberly to the HR department. Sorry, Kimberly, you're going to hate your life. I'm not sure anybody who really likes to be part of HR, but if you do, I'm not picking on you. And a lot of the stuff is done through in PowerShell, stuff like that. But typically and this, for some reason, this is one of the frameworks or one of the things that are being recommended in CIS, in NIST, CSF, and in NIST 861, I believe. And I know it's part of CMMC. But as soon as you add that, and as soon as it populates through, then that license will be applied to Kim. And it doesn't show up right now because it's got to go through provisioning and all that stuff. But that's basically how you do it. The last one we are going to do is we're going to work on our domain and our any of the DNS settings. Yeah, you see an all new tenants right here, Fortify 365 on Microsoft.com. Anytime you send that out, you definitely don't want that to be part of your domain name. So we're going to fix that. All right. So it automatically knows because during our registration, fortify365.com. Yes, I want to use that domain. Verify you own your domain. Yippity skippity. And it automatically knows that I'm using Cloudflare. Now, if you're not using Cloudflare, may I strongly recommend it, because the way that Microsoft sees Cloudflare and is able to integrate with it, as you can see, I'm not giving a bunch of text that I have to now manually copy and paste and all this other stuff. And it gives your overall presence a little bit more security just outside of just having it. So Cloudflare is definitely a good thing to have. And this thing will literally walk you through everything. So now it's going to want to add all the DNS records. So Exchange and Exchange Online protection. We're going to have our MX records, which AKA is your mail, your text file for your SPF record, and CNAME. We'll go ahead and make sure that we enable Skype for Business, which isn't really used a whole lot more these days, but it's best to have it in there. We'll talk about how to make sure later in, I think it is in the Teams section, to make sure you don't have personal Skype users trying to message people inside of your team organization. Definitely going to have Intune and mobile device management for 365. And if this is a new tenant and you're going through this, yeah, make sure you have your domain keys or DKIM. This will help set up a certain level of security for you, to help make sure that your emails are not sent out as spam, and help prove you are who you are when you're sending out that email. So let's definitely make sure that's set up, and I'll show you what I mean here in a moment. So again, because Microsoft is, recognizes Cloudflare and their relationship with each other, it's automatically going to add all of these things in here for you. Just imagine the amount of stuff you're saving from having to copy and paste that you normally have to do. And 365.com and whatever. Now we can swing back over here to our Cloudflare for this tenant. Yep, and you can see it's starting to populate everything in there. And you'll notice it automatically puts everything to DNS only. It doesn't proxy any of that stuff, which is what you want. So right now, Microsoft is just going through, waiting a minute to say, yep, okay. We see all of the DNS that was put in. So if you have 365 in there, or you already have 365 put in here, if you come in here to your Microsoft 360, whatever your domain is, you click on DNS records and click manage DNS. And if you do not have DKIM already enabled, this thing will automatically go through and have it at the, like, I literally have it in my tenant. Actually, I'm not going to show you my tenant over here on this other window, but I can actually, even though I have DKIM, I can actually check domain keys and put DKIM in here. So instead of hunting and pecking around in the enter ID, or it's security.microsoft.com, having to set that up, definitely use that tool to be able to set up your DKIM and get that implemented. So that was a very, very cool find to see, make sure, or see that was being done. If for some reason your process did not already set your proper domain to default, make sure it is. You just click on the ellipses here and click on set as default, and it will change that to default. All right. That is it for this session. This is, like I said, going through a lot of the basics. We do have our next webinar coming up on July 30th. because you are here now. Let me get that link for you. So you can go ahead and pre-register for our next webinar coming up. And with that, thank y'all all so much for tuning in. I'm glad some people got some value out of it. And I look forward to seeing everybody in the next one. Thanks so much for tuning in. See y'all next time.